Hi, my name is Tyler, and this presentation is titled The Rainbow Wave: Research Equity, Queer Identity, and the Need for Culturally Informed Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies. I kind of struggled with how to start this, and in the interest of taking this kind of technical topic and connecting it to humanity, I'm going to be kind of vulnerable with you all and start by going into a bit about myself and why this is the particular hill I will probably die on. But first, I want to define a concept that is key to this whole presentation. I want to start by defining data equity, which is a concept the Online Equity and Diversity Group Community Commons defines as an approach to collecting and using data that centers fairness, community power, and systemic accountability within research. It means recognizing and addressing bias, discrimination, power imbalances, and data practices involving communities in owning, interpreting, and benefiting from their own data, balancing risks and benefit to ensure just outcomes, especially for historically marginalized groups, and combining data with storytelling to reflect full, complex realities. At its true core, data equity aims to correct past and current harms, prevent future disparities, and use data to build more just and healthy world. I also have a few questions I want you to ponder as I'm working through these, and you can access them form through this QR code. If you want to work through it as I go, it'll be in the bottom corner of all these slides, so you can answer later if you want. But my first question is, have you ever looked for help or advice about something stressful or traumatic from someone who's never experienced that thing? How did that feel different from talking to someone with similar experiences? And under the effect of a psychedelic in a psychotherapy setting, how much do you think shared understanding or identity would change your experience? So let me know. I grew up in a rural Northern California in the 90s, just a little bit about me, where being gay felt invisible or dangerous. And media really only portrayed gay men as caricatures. And in my hometown, silence or performance was a survival skill. So for a long time, I believed people like me honestly just didn't exist or live to adulthood. Or to be writers, actors, people out in the media that I would see. So, but I've since proven that belief wrong, I'm glad to say. I'm now a 33-year-old openly gay man who's married to a wonderful husband. Just had my wedding last spring, and I'm deeply grateful to have found a life among beyond those constraints, among people, my chosen family. But when I first came out, the person who struggled most was my mother. She didn't really know any openly gay people personally, and her ideas of what it meant to be gay were pretty much shaped almost entirely by her faith, her church, news coverage of the AIDS epidemic, and one gay character on her favorite soap opera whose storyline, surprise, revolved around drug addiction and dying young. Day after I came out, she handed me a research article, and it claimed, scientifically, of course, that that being gay caused cancer, and that AIDS was essentially guaranteed, and that gay men became addicts, and they all died young. Years later, the world did seem like it was shifting in a more positive direction, and I finally started to feel a little bit safer. A little more open. So I decided to check that, intake box that said I'm a man who has sex with other men at the doctor's office. And with that one check mark, the tone of my shifts, of my visits drastically shifted. Suddenly STD tests were ordered, regardless of what I said about my sexual activity. My relationships, no matter how monogamous, were treated like a health risk. My weed use, however infrequent, became a sign of probable addiction and disorder. And the therapists I could find or and afford were always straight. Um, and though well-meaning, ultimately unable to provide the kind of direction or advice I like desperately craved. Um, when they did seem genuinely interested in trying to understand, it felt like I was just advocating for myself and educating the entire time rather than receiving care. And after years of trying this talk therapy, I was introduced through a friend to psilocybin, and I didn't know anything about psychedelics at the time beyond the like stereotypes. I wasn't speaking to my parents at the time, and it unexpectedly gave me a gift I didn't even know I needed or wanted. It was this wider perspective on all the things I blamed for making me feel othered or wrong. It was like someone zoomed out the camera on my childhood. I could see limitations my parents were carrying, the fears and cultural messaging that shaped their actions and worldviews. For the first time, I found real empathy for them. And that's softened something in me that no therapist um, or empathetic ear had been able to access previously. Over time and through being able to bring these new perspectives and conversations to my family, I was able to begin to shed this victim identity I had adopted without even realizing it. And by allowing a more complex story to emerge, I could start to reinspect my identity on my own terms. A huge part of that was just letting go of some deeply ingrained beliefs about what I was capable of, especially academically, for so long. And that actually led to me enrolling in PSU, Portland State University's psychology honors program and pursuing this work, studying psychedelic healing, not only as an academic topic, but as a tool with the potential to change lives. Just given how much I had been helped by psychedelics, how much freedom and how central my queer identity was to that healing process. Um, and with how hopeless I had been left feeling after engaging with a healthcare system that was not aware of queer issues or trauma, um, I decided to make the subject of my queer subject of my thesis queer representation in psychedelic mental health research during this second wave of psychedelic research and focus on um, inclusion of people like me in this work and in this in participant samples for my undergraduate thesis. So let's take a look at what I found. Um, so basically, I started off with a large search of specifically studies that were happening after the year 2000 in the second wave or this most recent upswing of research into psychedelics, studies that were looking specifically at mental health research with psychedelics, and studies that were original experimental research, so no meta-analyses or letters to the editor, and then looking specifically at studies that were looking at MDMA assisted therapy, ketamine, and psilocybin assisted therapy. And that ended me up with about 29 studies to look at for my analysis. This is just a cute little graphic to illustrate that pruning process. So what I found was across the 29 psychedelic assisted studies I reviewed, about 69% of the studies reported some demographic data, but 10% didn't share anything at all about demographics or identity. Another 21% mentioned gender somewhere in the text, but didn't include a demographic table or figure to back it up. And when I zoomed in on gender identity and sexual orientation, the gaps were even more glaring. Only one study included any non-binary gender options. Not a single study asked participants about their sexual orientation, which I thought was pretty crazy. And even when demographic data was reported, most studies, 77% of these 29, didn't do anything with that. No analysis, no subgroup comparisons, nothing. Just felt more like a checkbox that they had to check. And this snapshot really reinforced something that I was kind of starting to suspect, um, and that's that data equity in psychedelic assisted therapy research isn't just lagging, it's being overlooked entirely. So I wanted to look and explore a little bit more on the reasons why this is happening, and it's not just because researchers don't care about it or don't want to fix it. Um, so I wanted to look at the instrumental barriers. Instruments are a psychology word for questions. How do we ask people about themselves? One of the most foundational issues in queer research is that our tools haven't even really caught up with the complexity of real human identity. Most commonly, surveys, like national surveys, rely on single selection, overly simplified categories, especially for sexual orientation and gender identity. Um, and the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, actually gives this great example of a heterosexual man, identified man that might have sex with men and women, but feel primarily attracted to women. What box would they check in a demographic survey? Measuring just one of these domains can yield vastly different population estimates. So when we frame the question, how we frame the question shapes who gets counted and who doesn't, and how. And it's not just about understanding identity as it's not just about numbers, it's about understanding identity as relational, contextual, and especially when trans folks are involved, often outside of a binary system altogether. And if we want if we want honest, vulnerable responses, we need to be really thoughtful also about the language that we use. I gave this example that we see a lot in research. We will ask people, are you male, female, or other? And we're not thinking about where that word other isn't neutral. It often feels reductive or alienating. It tells some respondents, you're not worth naming. You're the exception. So even when the intention is inclusion, including a new space that isn't within the binary, the design of our tools can still do harm. So we have to talk about the political climate currently, because that really is going to affect a lot of these solutions and this whole situation. So when I bring these subjects up in research spaces, a lot of what I am told is that you want to pursue, if you want to pursue change, you have to pursue legislation. But in reality, it isn't as simple as that. It's just creating legislation. Flint et al. And colleagues found that even with those initiatives, with these initiatives that were instituted between the years 2000 and 2012, the Healthy People 2020 initiative and the Institute of Medicine's LGBT health agenda, when they measured changes in inclusion rates, there was no measurable increase in data collection across that 5-year span. We also have to really talk about this element of affecting the funds that get put forward for these studies. So while yes, policy can be a helpful starting point, we have to talk about the way DEI and equity efforts are being talked about within politics and how that can change what gets funded and how data is used, analyzed, and considered. These words, they elevate the words that are being used, they elevate or censor or shape what research gets funded or even taken seriously in the media. With recent changes in the administration earlier this year, with legislative rollbacks and this growing discomfort around equity language, many researchers have had to, for fear of losing their entire all their funding start to scrub terms like diversity, equity, and gender affirming from grants and organization websites, not because the science had changed or the need has changed, but because politics and the language being used has changed. And we're now in a period where words like DEI are being denatured and just slowly emptied of their meaning. It's really it's a real challenge when you care about improving the field and improving science, but the very language you need to describe that work starts starts to sound like empty branding. And what happens is urgency and humanity start to disappear with it. We see that reflected in the sheer exponential rise in these bills that are being considered across the country that would negatively affect and impact trans and gender nonconforming people. It's anticipated to grow. So as a result, LGBTQ identities, language, and even personal testimony get flattened into political sound bites. We're seeing health research related to gender and sexuality reframed as inherently biased or activist, even when it's methodologically rigorous and clinically vital. So what's being done? Despite all of these barriers I just discussed, there is a growing equity and diversity movement, mostly led by BIPOC organizations and outreach groups who have been pretty essential in shaping the more how to more equitably study and create study designs, recruit participants, and create safer frameworks. But when it comes to LGBT, queer, inclusion, especially for those living at intersections of multiple marginalized identities, that intersectionality still hasn't quite entered the conversation yet. And hoping to see more of that and push more of that forward. So the organization is kind of leading this charge. A big one is USONA, and I've had the privilege of working on one of their studies. They offer diversity and equity coaching. A lot of the ways that they're helping tackle accessing and making change within research is by using and by embedding diversity and equity principles into site placement strategies and intentionally placing research sites into these communities to help with recruitment and trust building. MAPS has also developed their diversity and equity work groups along with the Zendo Project, which is a grassroots organization that works a lot with directly with practitioners and foundations that work directly with people. And Shakruna has also been a leader of pushing forward research, pushing forward creating spaces like this, the Queering Psychedelics Conference that happens in San Francisco to create the space, queer spaces, to share ideas. So while research in queer research in psychedelics is still in its early stages, it is happening. I was able to work on a study that at the SNAP lab here that included an all queer cohort led by completely queer facilitators, which was unheard of. It still is pretty unheard of. We're also still in the development phases of accurate measurements of identity, sexual orientation, gender identity measures. These are the ones I could find through my searching on ProQuest. These are all 20 to 30 item measures that kind of suss out complexity within identity, but they still don't have much space for self-disclosure of identities. And we still have not quite figured out how to do that in a complex, nuanced way. So what do I recommend? What do we need for the future to do this better and continue to push this forward? We need opportunities for networking events, the ability to bring NGOs, non-governmental organizations that are all working independently, and some of them are connected, creating a network for them to all speak to each other, be aware of how research can be incorporated into their work. In a large way we can do this is by developing queer affinity spaces specifically designed to connect people working with within this area, such as data equity conferences, breakout workshops, and psychedelic events. A lot of ways that we can do this. Things that we still need for research. We need, how do we share this information safely and ask it safely? We need to be performing, as we get this data, meta-analyses to start mapping trends and building out frameworks and theories, developing standard and inclusive, as I said, self-report measures that we can start standardizing. Participants, once we have a way to ask these questions, into non-queer specific mental health research that's not just specific to queer issues, to start building out and normalizing these identities. And just to reiterate, representation in research isn't just about data points. It's about shaping how we understand people and integrating with empathy these identities into the larger culture. We need to be preparing and like taking stock of what we're saying to queer and questioning youth, especially that are developing their identities, and make sure that we're saying you exist, you're not broken, you're part of the story. And importantly, maintaining any of this progress is going to take accountability, and highly visible and ongoing accountability. This isn't just about inclusion for inclusion's sake, or blaming individual researchers working within a system that barely gives them the time to reflect, question, or breathe. It's about how can we do better to protect vulnerable populations from harm? How do we reduce adverse outcomes, unexpected adverse outcomes in psychedelic therapy? How do we refine these treatments for the real world so they're not just effective in the lab, but responsive to messy, rich, varied lives of people who turn to them after a lifetime of dead ends? This is what it looks like to do science in good faith. What works for whom and why? Right now, in this moment we're in, this is rare. We're at the beginning of a psychedelic integration into mental health care. And that means researchers have a once-in-a-life generation opportunity to set the tone. Psychedelics are under this bright spotlight. Therapists, clinicians, communities, they're all watching from the front lines of a mental health crisis that's run away from us. If researchers today say they want to be different from the ones I know we've all had to read about in school, the ones who use biased interviews, statistics, and institutional power to pathologize people like me, then the question is, what are you doing right now to make sure that your work doesn't become someone else's cautionary tale? How will you make sure it expands understanding, promotes healing, and earns a legacy that the next generation won't have to undo? And I want to leave with this quote. The answer to how we develop equitable psychedelic-assisted therapies lives in a new kind of relationship between the people asking questions and those who've never been asked to answer. Thank you.